Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being at Quantitative Seminar today. My name is Angela, and I'm one of your co-coordinators. Um, so I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of the land which touches the shared waters, and all of the bands and tribes in the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. We also acknowledge that we live and work on the ancestral lands of the Duwamish people and the first people of Seattle. Our speakers today are Michelle Havey. Michelle is a principal fisheries biologist with Anchor QEA. She has been with Anchor QEA for over 8 years and has a deep, established experience in fisheries management. Michelle brings experience from previous roles at Anchor QEA, Hart Krauser, and NOAA, and has robust skill set that includes ecology, water quality, ecological restoration, environmental consulting, environmental policy, and more. Michelle earned her bachelor's and master's degrees here at SAFS. Also joining us is Jenn Stebbings. Jenn is an environmental program manager in the Maritime Division's Habitat Initiatives team at the Port of Seattle. Her work focuses on designing, constructing, monitoring, and maintaining various habitats in the Green Duwamish watershed and nearshore areas of Elliott Bay, the Ship Canal, and Shilshoe Bay Marina. Jenn's approach to her work is characterized by a commitment to environmental stewardship and a dedication to supporting the local community. She is a graduate of the College of Forest Resources, which we now call SAFS. Jenn and Michelle would like to take questions during a couple of scheduled breaks or pauses that they have in their interviews, so you're welcome to ask questions then or wait until the end. Of course, everyone online is welcome to put questions into the chat or question and answer section, which we can monitor here. Please join me in giving a big round of applause to Jenn and Michelle.
All right, thank you very much. I'll kick things off with a brief overview of the Comprehensive Repair and Maintenance Program and the port calculator, which this presentation is about. So that's a mouthful. So we refer to the Comprehensive Repair and Maintenance Program as the CRAMP. Which I think everyone involved, including our agency partners, would agree is a pretty fitting acronym. So you'll see aerial photos of both the ports of Seattle and Tacoma on that first slide there. So want to give a little context that the ports of Seattle and Tacoma are municipal corporations or special purpose districts, like a school district. We have an elected commission that is if you participated in the recent election, we had commissioners that were elected for both the ports of Seattle and Tacoma, and they're elected by county residents. So Port of Tacoma is beholden to the residents of Pierce County, whereas Port of Seattle is beholden to residents of King County. So, but the Port of Seattle and the Port of Tacoma worked really closely to develop the overall strategy and permit application materials for the CRAMP. Each port holds its own permit, but this really was a highly collaborative effort supported by the Northwest Seaport Alliance, which I will not get into because it's a joint venture with both ports, our consultant teams, and of course, our federal, state, and local agency partners. And forwarding May. Here?
Yeah, the arrows.
You did. Oh, this? I did that. Did it have to do it twice? Okay, sorry about that. So what is the CRAMP? It is a regulatory instrument in that it's a permit that streamlines approval for most of the routine repair and maintenance activities at port maritime facilities. The permit ensures routine repair and maintenance activities can be completed timely and efficiently, and it promotes port environmental goals through piling removal, alternative shoreline stabilization techniques, and debris removal. So why the CRAMP? In late 2017, early 2018, National Marine Fisheries Service developed a new rationale to address the enduring effects of existing structures on Endangered Species Act listed species. The premise of the policy is that regular maintenance and repair that extends the life of an existing structure results in an enduring effect to ESA-listed species and their habitats. And therefore, enduring effects must be mitigated. I'll note that there was an effective moratorium on all ESA consultations while National Marine Fisheries Service figured out how they were going to account for this change in the approach. This effective moratorium lasted about 3 to 4 years. So it's a long time to defer maintenance or wait for project approval. Entire grant cycles came and went with no project to show for it because we couldn't get through ESA consultation. So to address the question of how to calculate the required mitigation of repair and maintenance activities, NMFS developed the Puget Sound Nearshore Habitat Conservation Calculator. You'll hear me refer to it as the Nearshore Calculator from here on out. This was the primary tool for all waterfront facilities in Puget Sound. This means permit applicants who had in-water work from residential structures to commercial and industrial facilities would need to use the Nearshore calculator to determine mitigation needs to maintain their existing structures. The Nearshore calculator did not work for the ports of Seattle and Tacoma, and I will get more into that in a little bit. So this is just to highlight that we've been pursuing the suite of federal, state, and local permitting authorities for a 10-year program. So the NMFS Enduring Effect policy was the catalyst to identify a federal nexus through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, but we have also pursued the full list of in-water permits, including Section 401, Section 10, the Coastal Zone Management, HPAs, there's a lot of acronyms, don't worry. Shoreline Master Programs and SEPA, going through SEPA review. So who has been involved in the CRAMP? Just about everybody. So there were a lot of folks engaged along the way of this CRAMP journey. So for ESA consultation process with NMFS and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the technical work group included technical staff from both agencies and both ports and consultants to come up with the calculator. In addition to the technical work group for the port calculator, we also had great support from our colleagues at the Northwest Seaport Alliance, outside legal counsel, and consultants to help advise and move the needle at high levels at federal agencies. I'll also mention that for the permit process itself, we spent many hours and meetings with our friends at the Corps, Department of Ecology, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and our tribal partners and EPA. The message here is that the unique and comprehensive nature of the permit, we pursued continuous communication with each of the agencies. We leveraged our liaisons, the Water Resources Development Act, or WRDA, representatives at the Corps, and our direct contacts within each agency to keep the program moving forward. So where is the CRAMP? So this is just quickly on the two ports that where the CRAMP resides. So the Port of Seattle has 28 waterfront maritime facilities spanning both Elliott Bay, the East and West waterways, the Duwamish River, the tidal estuary of the Duwamish itself, and the freshwater sites along the Ship Canal. The Port of Tacoma has 34 properties with shoreline frontage along Commencement Bay, Blair Waterway, Sikkim Waterway, and the Hylabos Waterway. So just to give it a sense of how long this took. The whole idea started when NMFS announced the policy change for ESA consultations of maintenance projects to include the enduring effect. So that was back in late 2017, early 2018. Then there were several discussions and process back and forth between the services and the Corps. And you'll notice here in 2022, highlighted in red, the publication of the Memorandum of Understanding between NMFS and the Corps this resolved the dispute between those two regulatory agencies that was delaying ESA consultations in the Pacific Northwest. The Corps agreed to implement NMFS's enduring effect guidance nationwide for activities that it regulates. So that's something to keep in mind. Right now, it's just focused right here in the Pacific Northwest, but this does have implications nationwide. NMFS commits to develop NMFS committed to developing a programmatic biological opinion to streamline those ESA consultations for repair and maintenance activities under the Salish Sea Nearshore Programmatic, which is a mouthful, so we refer to it as SNAP. I know. Ultimately, though, the ports of Seattle and Tacoma landed on taking a different proactive approach to work with NMFS and the Corps to figure out how this program was going to work. So we landed on the Comprehensive Repair and Maintenance Program, the CRAMP. We did the work up front to coordinate and document, what the program was going to entail. And we submitted our permit application officially in June of 2024. This was after several years of unofficial and official communication back and forth. So we spent countless hours and meetings between 2024 and 2025 and ended up with our permit being issued in August of 2025. So hot off the presses. Truly, this was a very big accomplishment that took many, many hands to achieve. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Michelle to give a brief overview of the habitat equivalency analysis for which the Nearshore calculator and the port calculator are based upon. So, if there are any questions on the CRAMP itself or the journey that it took for the CRAMP to become a reality, now is your time to ask. Yes.
It just seems crazy that it took not do maintenance for so many years while trying to address some bureaucratic change in the regulation.
You're not alone in that thought process. Yeah, it was a very frustrating time because they weren't even doing individual consultations at that time, and so we had to defer maintenance for 3 to 4 years, and that whole time, we're sort of banging on the door, seeing if anybody is home to have us do that. Luckily, the ports of Seattle and Tacoma have a long history of doing programmatic approaches to certain types of repair and maintenance activities. And so we did have some permits already in place to be able to continue to do certain types of work, but any sort of new repair and maintenance that wasn't already covered under an existing permit had to wait. Yeah, I think at one time the NMFS had over 200 consultations in backlog. So
before they fired a bunch of people.
that was when they were fully staffed. Yeah. So on that chipper note, I'll pass it off to Michelle.
Right. Okay, so I'm just going to spend a couple slides here talking about the real underlying model that we use. So habitat equivalency analysis, or HEA, as we'll commonly refer to it. This was developed actually by NOAA back in 1977 to assess ecological services lost or gained. This was largely implemented to address the Exxon Valdez oil spill. So that was sort of the start of assessing ecological damages and then having a mechanism to quantify it so that any issues like an oil spill could be paid back in an ecological context. One of the basic assumptions in a habitat equivalency, unlike the name, is that all habitats are not equal. So that's kind of counterintuitive. But effectively what the model does is it allows you to set what ecological function each habitat type has, and then you essentially can work in a unitless system using habitat function to allow for different offsets. So for example, eelgrass habitats, marsh habitat, those are really the gold standard. And the way that we score them is from a 0 to 1. So effectively, if you impaired really high value habitat, you can offset that with lower value habitat of a higher quantity. So you essentially use acreage to kind of scale to offset ecological function. The kind of third element with HEA is that habitat is more valuable today than it is tomorrow. So there's a temporal loss as you move through time. So if you, let's say you impact habitat today, if you restore habitat, but it takes you 10 years to get that restoration project in the ground, you've essentially lost 10 years of function, plus the time it takes for that restoration project to actually start functioning, because it takes time for vegetation to establish and whatnot. So there's a discounting factor that gets applied in the model year after year after year. So we see this like downward trajectory where habitats 10 years from now are not as valuable as today. And basically what this does is it allows us to assess how much damage has been done, and then that same value you're trying to offset with mitigation. So you can plug it in to be to assess habitat loss, and then you can also, on the flip side, look at habitat gains. And then once you get those to be equal, then you've properly offset your impact. So here, this graph here is kind of what I was talking about. So you assign like a pre and post project relative habitat value on that scale of 0 to 1 for each of your habitat types. And that allows you to sort of put them on equal ground. So eelgrass would be up here, and maybe a riparian forest would be down around 0.3. We take into account the overall acreage, how long we expect the project will last or the impact will last. It takes time for restored habitat to achieve what we call full function. So it takes a while for a forest to establish or a wetland to grow. Essentially what we do is we're generating, the unit that we're generating is discounted service acre years, DSAs. And if you have a project that is impacting habitat, we're generating debits with AHIA. And if we're restoring habitat, we're generating credits. So it's a positive and negative system. And this example here, super simple, but this would be if you had, let's say, a parking lot right now, so you're starting with 0 value at year 1, and you take 1 acre of that parking lot and you're going to make it a high functioning wetland. So it's a 1.0 at the end of the day. It's going to take 15 years for that wetland to grow. So you can see the graph, we're achieving full function over that 15 years. But as soon as we get to the full function, we see that discount curve start to take over. So we're achieving less function over time. So this is what all of our graphics essentially look like.
Sorry, these days,
These days?
The area that curve, or is that the peak value of the curve?
It's the area under the curve. Yep. And so I mentioned, so natural resource damage assessments like Exxon Valdez, Deepwater Horizon, the Lower Duwamish here locally, Portland Harbor, those are all natural resource damage assessments. And that's what the HEA was really developed to assess initially. Now we've taken that tool because it's been vetted and it's really a widely accepted tool. And we're applying it to broader mitigation projects like shoreline development and maintenance projects, which often have impacts we're avoiding the net loss of nearshore habitat, and then being able to make improvements within the project zone. So it's really, this tool has been the basis for a number of more local tools, such as these. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, we'll just. So we have some location-specific HEAs. Lower Duwamish, there was the Hylebos or the Commencement Bay HEA down in Tacoma. There's also a HEA for the Lower Columbia River. So those are more local. There's actually an Oregon-based tool that has some similarities. It's not a straight HEA. And then, as Jen mentioned, we have the Puget Sound Nearshore calculator, and now we have this port-specific, this port calculator, which is really specific to port infrastructure. We tried to pull as many of the similarities in from the Nearshore calculator as we could and as made sense, just to help streamline the process. And Jen is going to talk a little bit more about some of the details of the port calculator, and then we're actually going to dive in and play around with the model a little bit. So any questions about HIA? Yeah.
How do you assign the habitat swap? It's like a hobby that they process this cat. I don't know.
Yes. So it was large. Yes. So it's been done a couple different ways. So subject matter experts and a panel of specialists were used to develop the tools, or I'm sorry, the values in, for example, the Commencement Bay and the Lower Duwamish HIA. We went through a bit more of a quantitative process in the port calculator and for the nearshore calculator, where we actually went through and scored the primary and the primary and biological factors, the PBFs for Chinook salmon, to end up with a total score. And then we made them all relative to whatever the highest scoring habitat zone was for all of the PBFs. So so it was a scoring exercise, but then we set everything to whatever the score of the highest scoring one was. Let's say it was 3.7. We made everything relative to 3.7 so that we were back on that 0 to 1 scale. So semi-quantitative, but a lot of subject matter expert and literature review. All right, so I'm going to hand it back over to Jen.
All right, doing a quick overview of the port calculator. So as we mentioned, the NMFS developed the nearshore calculator to determine the enduring effect of certain activities. One key important thing to note is that they based the nearshore calculator on residential structures, not port infrastructure. So the habitat conservation calculator, the nearshore calculator, assumes that the habitat will fully recover if that structure is not maintained. However, the ports quickly realized the nearshore calculator would not work for port infrastructure. So NMFS told the ports of Seattle and Tacoma to present an alternative for a highly altered estuarine environment. We conducted an exercise with subject matter experts, just similar to the HIA, to reevaluate habitat recovery assumptions based on structural decay. And I would like to note that no Kevin Costners were harmed in the making of this particular presentation. So this is a subset of the total activities that are covered in the CRAMP. These are the activities that the ports and the services agreed would have an enduring effect on ESA-listed species if they were maintained, repaired, and or replaced. I'm not going to go through the whole list of them here, but it kind of gives you an idea of the approach that we took based on these port-specific structures. We also looked at beneficial activities, and those also require the port calculator so that we have the capability of capturing those credits. So when we do something that improves the ecological function of our environments, we have the port calculator now to be able to capture those credits. So just some general similarities between the port calculator and the nearshore calculator. Both use a lot of acronyms. So as Michelle mentioned, both use the HIA as a framework, using very fancy functions in Microsoft Excel spreadsheets. If you are a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet nerd, come see us. We are your people. So it also calculates debits and credits based on activity type. As Michelle mentioned, those are those DSAs. It incorporates physical and biological features of ESA-listed species into the relative habitat value. It includes buffers, excuse me. It includes buffer area for overwater cover and armored slopes. And it includes a robust rationale and user guide to assist with entries. And I promise we were not kidding about the acronyms. So some general differences between the port calculator and the nearshore calculator. The port calculator calculates projects for 3 species, whereas the nearshore calculator only does it for Chinook salmon. So they use Chinook salmon as a proxy for all other ESA-listed species, whereas we account for 3 specific ESA-listed species: Chinook salmon, marble murrelets, and bull trout. The port calculator uses the current existing condition as environmental baseline, whereas the nearshore calculator uses a pristine pre-development condition as their environmental baseline. The port calculator includes additional habitat zones to account for changes in habitat productivity. The nearshore calculator incorporates all deeper elevations into the deep shore zone, which starts at just minus 10 feet mean lower low water. So it treats minus 52 feet mean lower low water the same as minus 10 feet mean lower low water. So that's a very large difference, because a lot of the port infrastructure is based in that minus 50, minus 52 feet mean lower low water. The port calculator acknowledges a port environment will not return to a pristine condition without some kind of active restoration, whereas the nearshore calculator assumes that the environment will just magically return to pristine with no restoration actions. The port calculator accounts for the durability or the robustness of port infrastructure, whereas the nearshore calculator, as already mentioned, assumes a residential structure's lifespan is about 40 years. And if you've been down to the port area, you know that we have structures there that are well over 100 years old and still being used in some form or other, whether or not we've maintained them. So the port calculator calculates credits for projects that result in net ecological gain, whereas the nearshore calculator actually zeroes out credits for projects that result in net ecological gain. So you either get a 0 or a minus, whereas with the port calculator, you get a minus, a 0, or a positive. And so, okay, components of the port calculator. I can hand it back over to you if you want. We could take questions there, but I think we're going to get into some real good nerdy stuff now.
Nothing online.
Okay.
So this is actually going to be pretty similar to the what is here slide. So the port calculator does take into account the area or the acreage of whatever the footprint of the structure that we're evaluating, the overall habitat condition, which for port infrastructure is currently degraded. So we have degraded habitat conditions out there right now. We take into consideration the duration. So with HIA, we're looking at project life. Here, we're looking at a maintenance cycle. That's the duration that we're calculating the effects over. It does have that same discounting factor, which is 3% per year. And that's standard for all of the NRD assessments. I've worked on probably 20 at this point, and I don't think I've ever seen anything but 3%. We take into account the structure type or the type of project. As Jen mentioned, species. So this was a request, I don't know, about halfway into the process. Yeah, okay. I was giving them the benefit of the doubt. That was sort of a left turn where we had to consider, we thought that we were just building sort of a similar calculator to the nearshore where we just had to evaluate for Chinook salmon, and that was a proxy. There was some discussion and a desire to have this be actually kind of 3 models in one, to account for the 3 different species, which we were able to luckily pretty easily adapt. And I'll show you how that actually plays out. So this takes into account all 3 species, and then the habitat zones that we're impacting. So it's the different elevation bands, and then the relative habitat value, which I kind of talked about. We went through that scoring matrix to get relative, to get the, I guess, absolute habitat values, and then made everything relative to the maximum score possible. So the port calculator, we have 3 major project types. So if we're just maintaining or repairing a structure sort of as is, that would be an enduring effect. So we're not really changing much about it. Maybe we're swapping out pile types, maybe we're repaving, a cruise terminal. So we're really not changing the overall footprint of the project. We're rather just maintaining it so it will stay in the environment longer. So that's the enduring effect. We also saw a lot of value in putting a little bit more thought and time into, okay, well, what if we not only are repairing our project, but we have a need to expand it for some reason? One of the things was, so for some of the cruise terminals, there might be a need to put a little line handling platform on. So that's technically, we're expanding it because it doesn't exist right now. So we're going to have maybe 100 more square feet of your 2-acre cruise terminal to account for overwater shading. So we have the ability to put sort of any footprint expansion into this expansion tab. And then the third element, as Jen mentioned, we really needed a way to memorialize whenever the ports had opportunities to provide environmental benefit. So the most shining example of that is creosote in our environment, we've recognized is very highly undesirable. And so there's a lot of benefit and a lot of push to swap out for more sustainable materials that are less environmentally harmful. So creosote removal is a credit generating activity, but we could also, when replacing a structure, maybe the ports have an opportunity to build a smaller footprint than what's there. So that would also be a credit generating activity. So here we have the different zones kind of in a schematic over on the right. So Jen mentioned we've got, so we have our riparian area, which is above our highest astronomical tide. We have our upper and lower intertidal. So those are sort of a differentiation of how much that zone is inundated. So upper intertidal is just periodically inundated, whereas lower intertidal far more frequently inundated with our tide cycles. Shallow subtidal goes down to generally our lowest extent of eelgrass, down at -14. And then we have these two additional categories that are really more reflective of port conditions, where we have mid subtidal, which reflects down to kind of the lower extent of kelp, excuse me. And then our deep subtidal, which really captures some of these larger deep dredged berths that our ports have. So those are not as valuable as, say, shallow subtidal, where we have some submerged aquatic vegetation. Okay, so this right here took about a year to develop, this graphic. This is the result of a lot of discussion with the agencies, their technical representatives, their attorneys, the port's attorneys, the port's technical representatives. I'm trying to decide how detailed I want to get in this. So let's see. I'm definitely better with pointing things out. So the mic, I won't move. So the top box on the far left, we've got our habitat condition on our y-axis here. So we went through that scoring exercise that I mentioned. We did it for these three main conditions. So fully functional is what we would expect a pristine or restored site to be. So we went through and scored what the PBFs would be. And then we did a modified condition. So we went through that exact same scoring exercise, but we sort of had to mentally go through the exercise of, okay, what would the habitat look like along the Seattle waterfront if we physically removed Pier 66? We didn't do anything else. We just effectively cut the piles off, removed that overwater decking, but we didn't do any restoration whatsoever. How valuable would that really be with all of those adjacent pressures still hampering the environmental quality? So that was the modified condition. And then the degraded condition is, what is it right now, where we've got these 100-plus-year-old creosote overwater structures, we've got riprap slopes. So that would be the degraded condition of like what the port's shorelines look like right now with the structures in place. So we had those three different conditions, and effectively what we're trying to calculate is the enduring effect. So that area under the curve that we looked at in the HEA slides, that's represented much more simplistically by this gold box. So right now, our habitats are degraded. And the guidance from 2018 is that by maintaining our structures, we are preventing that degraded habitat from improving to a more modified rather than a pristine. In the ports, this was kind of the big tenet for the port calculator, is the habitat would only get as good as a modified condition. So our calculator quantifies the delta between those two for whatever the area is. Say it's a 1 acre pier. It's the delta of those habitat functions over time for that 1 acre, and it takes into account that 3% discount. So all of those components that we mentioned before are sort of wrapped up. And so the area that we're quantifying is that gold box. That's really the basic principle behind the port calculator. So the trickiest part about that was we had to come up with, well, let me step back for 1 second. As you can see, there's sort of a distinction in the modified portion where there's a maximum site potential. If you were able to go and physically remove, let's say, Pier 66, you would achieve the maximum site potential there. So the scoring that we went through, because you've gone and physically removed everything associated with that pier. But in reality, that's not how it would degrade, because that's not what we're estimating. We're estimating what would happen if the maintenance didn't happen. So we're kind of looking at more of like a crumbling scenario rather than cleanly going and removing it. So we had to come up with this like modifier that was called the actual site habitat, or the actual site potential. And in order to do that, we gathered subject matter experts, which included geotechnical engineers, port engineers, fish biologists. There were, I think, about 6 of us that sat around in a room for many workshops. And we had to really determine and come to NMFS with a proposal to say, here's our difference. Here's what we're planning to do. So we kind of broke it into 2 things. First, we assessed, well, what would that structure do if left untouched in 300 years? Would it just go away and like we would never know it was there? Or would it, because it's a cruise terminal that was built with however many, thousands of tons of concrete, is it pretty much going to look the same and maybe just not be as pretty? So we effectively looked at what the structural loss would look like and how often do you have to maintain it. That's our maintenance cycle. So that was the structural part. And then after we did the structural part, which took longer than I wanted to, then we had to go through and say, okay, if that's what the structure looks like, how much would the habitat improve? Is it going to come back fully? Or if it just only crumbled a little bit, is the habitat pretty much the same? So our World Without Us, which is the Kevin Costner water world view, was really simply those 2 parts. And effectively, those were quantified as percentages. We multiplied those percentages together for every single structure that we had for every single habitat zone. And that gave us our weighted habitat improvement. So we took the weighted habitat improvement and used that to calculate our actual site potential. So it's a lot of, it was just kind of some mathematical gymnastics, but it allowed us to sort of have a rationale and a justification that we could provide to show that even if we don't touch that cruise terminal, we're still not going to see the habitat gains. It's not going to magically go away, and we're not going to realize all of those habitat ecological benefits. So that's the formula behind World Without Us. And that was a lot of information. And I was going to take this time now and hop into the actual model so we could poke around and you guys could see kind of what a real world example looks like. But before I do that, any questions?
I don't know.
No? Okay. Sweet. Yeah. Okay. All right. Oh, so I'll have to look over here. Okay, so first, one of the things that we had, like I said, we tried to use as much of the Nearshore calculator as really made sense because we weren't trying to reinvent the wheel. We were just trying to change the parts that really didn't scale up appropriately for port infrastructure. So this is actually one of the elements of the Nearshore calculator where effectively the DSAs get a multiplier. Thanks. So we sort of have these top two, the natal estuary and the pocket estuary or the embayment. Those are what I've termed the location specific adjustment factors. And so if both of these are true, so if we're within 5 miles of a Chinook natal estuary or 1 mile of Hood Canal, which doesn't apply to the ports, but again, I just basically took this out of the Nearshore calculator. If we're in one of those kind of sensitive areas, so we're close to a natal estuary, you get extra bonus points for credits that you generate in that region, but you also have more impact. So whether you're generating debits or credits, it's going to be 1.5 times whatever your unadjusted or your raw DSA value would be. Same thing with pocket estuary, that if it's within a natal estuary and it's an embayment or a pocket estuary, which are highly valuable sensitive habitats, then you basically multiply by 1.9. This doesn't really apply to the ports, but I left it in because again, I was just trying to keep it similar. If the shoreline has documented forage fish spawning or herring spawning, that also makes it extra sensitive and extra valuable. So those are options as well that would adjust the credits and debits up accordingly. So then I'm going to try and step through this in a logical format. So the adjustment factors are kind of what set the stage for your multipliers. What we did here is we set up this is my lookup tab. Yeah.
Just curious, what, I guess, how did you decide on like those multipliers, like the 1.9 or like 1.4?
Those were pulled just directly from the Nearshore calculator. So yeah, we didn't suggest modifying or augmenting those values that were established. Those were established using some literature values. Yeah, so that's all documented a lot more. I think I took the easy way out and I said, look at the Nearshore calculator document. But that is available. Yeah. That's available online. If you look at the Nearshore calculator web page, there's a user guide. And so all of the documentation for the elements that we used in here as well are part of that. Yeah. So this is just really our landing page for the values in the drop downs that we use just so that everything is a 1-to-1. But we had about, what was that? Yeah, 27 different structure types that we looked at. And again, we looked at every single elevation band that was applicable for all of those structures. These are our 6 habitat zones. We have our 3 species. We have those 3 different habitat conditions. So all of this is going to look pretty similar. Yeah, we'll leave that alone. The dominant substrate, this was a bigger part when we started out, but we didn't end up really focusing on this as much. There didn't end up being as big of a difference between soft sediments and like larger aggregate once we got into more of the documentation. We went through this. So this is sort of a nice summary for each zone and each substrate type and habitat condition. this was the normalized relative habitat values for each of the 3 species. You will notice that they are all the same. Ultimately, we built out this calculator to be, yeah. Shocker. It does work for the 3 species. There is one difference that only comes into play for the enduring effect. We did not have sufficient literature to support different habitat values for bull trout or marbled murrelets. There just wasn't enough information. So as of right now, all 3 are the same. That could change, that could be modified in the future if more data become available. But as of right now, all the relative habitat values for all 3 species are the same. Where we do see a difference is the world without us, because the impact of the habitat gains for marbled murrelets on a couple of the structure types is different. So we do end up getting different answers with marbled murrelets. So those took, I don't know, 10 months to get to agreement on. And I think then I'm gonna hop to here. So these are our 3 kind of input tabs. So we have, I mentioned the ability to quantify our enduring effects. We have the ability to generate debits from expanded projects, and then we have credit. We tried to keep everything as similar as humanly possible. We were trying to not make this rocket science. It still takes a little while and a little getting used to because it's new for everybody. But the way that we set this up is that I actually wrote this out, let me see. So I'll just wing it. So we have here on the left, the baseline conditions. So we have a structure that the port is going to go and do some maintenance on. I have got this example teed up so that we can look at how things modify. But you would pick from your drop down, what type of structure do we have? And I'm saying we have got a heavy overwater cover, which would be kind of like a cruise terminal. So really highly industrialized, super sturdy. So that structure actually is going to span a couple different zones as it goes out into the water. So we've got one line for each zone that it hits. As I said, for the enduring effect today, the habitat under that is degraded. So that would be our current condition. I just said that we had large rock because that's pretty standard. And then we've got the acreage associated with each of those habitat types. The gray cells, so all the blue cells are user entry. So we want the user to go in, select from these drop downs, and then enter whatever acreage they have. And we've got a series of X lookups. Let's see here. Okay. Oh, it's on the protected sheet. Okay. Well, we have a series of X lookups that pull from the lookup values tab and also from the world without us. So this pulls whatever the scoring matrix is for that zone and substrate, zone, condition, and substrate. That's what our relative habitat value was from our scoring exercise. So then we move over to what are our post-project conditions? Well, like I said, we're just repairing something that's already there. So it's still going to be overwater cover. It's still in the same zone. Here we've got a series of X lookups that pull how often we're going to have to go and maintain it. So we're going to have to mitigate for now until we think they're going to have to maintain it again. So this is going to get quantified over 75 years. And here in the enduring effect, the default is that we assume we're precluding it from bumping up into that modified category. So by maintaining it, we're precluding that ecological lift. So that is, we're trying to pull that value to set the delta that will run through the model. We use the same acreage because it has to balance out on both sides. We have our maximum site potential that was part of our scoring, but then that actually gets adjusted down with our weighted habitat improvement. So we're only going to capture 50% of that delta. So that means our actual site potential is 0.53. So our model calculates the difference between the 0.41 that it is today and the 0.53 that we think it would be at the end of the day, or in 75 years. So then then it runs through the models and essentially spits out for that part, for that zone, we would be generating 0.68 debits because of our 1.9 adjustment factor. So it was 0.36, but then we apply the adjustment factor, so that bumps it up to a higher debit because it's in a particularly sensitive area. This rolls up the whole package for all of the different models. And I will just pop over really quick to show you that first row, this is what the model actually looks like. So it pulls all the input values here from what we just entered. So all the yellow are what we just entered. This 0.36 was our unadjusted value. So this is just calculating the raw DSAs over time, and it's gonna stop quantifying at that 75-year mark. So it uses the maintenance cycle. So ultimately then this 0.36 gets pulled back into our tab over here, right here, adjusted, and then summed up for our net effects. And the other thing that I'll mention here is that is the impact. So this is our answer, 1.19 for all 3 zones. That's for marbled murrelets. So I can look at Chinook and look at that. It's a lot less. So overwater cover is where we have a difference between the impact it has on marbled murrelets versus Chinook. So you can essentially go and grab each one of these, run it, and it will paste in appropriately, or you can just hit this nifty tool and it will run, which is way better. That is brand new. That's one of the recent changes. And all of that is sort of, this is sort of a landing page where you can keep all sorts of notes on how you're coming up with your various acreages. And here I basically just put this in so you could see right now, all 3 of the acres for what we just had entered. So they're all even, right? And our answer was minus 1.192. But if let's say more of the structure was in the shallow subtidal, which is more valuable, that's actually our most valuable habitat zone, and I rerun this, we get a lot more debits than we would. Minus is bad. And just for comparison, each of those debits, so it's about 4, in order to purchase those credits, if you had to purchase them from the Puget Sound Partnership, those are $140,000 per credit, just for context. So let's say you're back to 0.1, but you've got, big area down in the deep subtidal. Now you're back to 1.84. So that didn't really change much. So the much lower value in the deep subtidal, if more of your area is in that lower value, it's less debits.
I know.
You had a question?
Yeah, this is really cool work, and I'm curious, is this like, I think when you said like, this is what companies have to pay for, that reminds me of like, get like greenhouse gas emissions when companies like go over the limits, then they have to pay for credits. So is this like sort of is this you guys like creating a sort of like a normalized system that when companies impede on some areas habitat, then you guys can calculate what their usage is and make them pay with these credits.
This one is specific to ports, and so it wouldn't be other companies, but this is being leveraged. So other ports are going to start using this in the near future. So Port Angeles and Bellingham are, but the Nearshore calculator is, yeah. So other companies or residents, they're basically, it's a similar model, just vastly different underlying assumptions. And they spit out the same thing and have to pay into that system in order to offset their debit. So in order to do their project, whether it's put in a new marina float or repair their single finger pier out to their boat, yeah, they're generating DSAs and they have to pay at that same rate. Now the port is probably not going to have to pay that rate because they're going to be generating credits and debits, and ultimately it's going to be a balanced system. So at the end of the day, they're estimating that their whole program is actually going to be credit generating rather than having to go outside and pay to purchase credits at that price that I mentioned. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah.
I just want to ask how this, I mean, so this calculator does not include things, like what's happening during the construction or the maintenance of those things.
Right.
And I feel like that's one part that I'm like especially curious about is like, even if your project is not expanding,
Mhm.
there, you know, what if there's like effects of the maintaining outside of just like the enduring effect? Like I'm thinking about like dredging birds for ships coming. And like, I think, I remember, you know, there's effects of things in the construction of maintaining the enduring structure. So how is that calculated?
Yeah,
Yeah.
good question. So the construction effects are basically, they were consulted upon differently
Gotcha.
than the enduring effect. So we have construction impacts that are consulted upon for ESA-listed species, and that's covered in our biological opinion. Whereas the enduring effect is that lasting impact of those dredged birds. Yeah.
I have another question.
Yeah.
There's a mention of the southern residents, but they were displayed on the turtles on it. You like really caught me off guard with bull trout. Really thought it was gonna be the orcas. Why are they not included as one of the three species or the species involved?
NIMS is using Chinook as a proxy.
Got
And that was largely because these are such nearshore impacts that, yeah, any effects to Chinook, we assume are being captured for the net effects on southern residents. Yeah.
Which is better.
I know, doesn't break my heart.
So, I mean, I was just thinking like a very broad scale here. I was thinking like, yeah, this is what it takes to like repair a dock in Seattle. Like, what is it like in China? Do they just be like, oh, we need a new port, make it done by, you know, July next year, and then just create a new port? You know,
Yeah.
so it just
I don't.
What not like damaging the environment.
Mhm.
Sure, but this the whole process of taking years and years and years to like repair some piling or whatever, it seems.
Oh, yeah.
Seems, you know, a little too much.
Nope, agreed. I mean, there are, you know, there's trade-offs, right? So if you don't have nearly the environmental regulations that, you know, the robust environment regulations that we have, you might be able to do it faster, but what are those long-term effects going to be? And so when we're going through maybe these like painful discussions and you know, being kind of burdened by, you know, all of these regulations, you know, there's a purpose for it. There is a reason behind it. Sometimes we don't always agree on what that reason is, but the ports, you know, part of the port's mission is to create economic development, but in a sustainable way. So ultimately, I think one of the things that we finally came to an, you know, agreed upon approach was that we all want the same thing. They don't want us to not maintain our stuff, because if we don't maintain our stuff, that stuff ends up in the environment and unusable and it's bad. You know, whereas, you know, we also want to maintain our stuff. But we want to, you know, we don't want to do it in a way that is going to harm the species that live here, because we also live here. You know, we have this. Yeah, so we all want the same thing. We want to be able to maintain our infrastructure, but do it in a way that doesn't have lasting impacts. And we don't always agree on what those enduring effects look like, but the ports really chose to, instead of being combative and saying absolutely not, and, you know, really doing this pushback, and we tried that method initially and we just were getting nowhere. And so we're like, you know what, like ultimately, this program is going to result in net ecological gain. We want that too. So why don't we do it using a tool that is logical and rational for port infrastructure? And so that's how we all came to an agreement, is like, we want to do the same thing that you want to do, but we just want to use a tool that fits.
Yeah, I'm not against the tool, I'm just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the broader, like,
No,
regulatory environment.
Yeah.
You know, a slide where you're like, we have to obey these 10
Yeah.
completely separate regulations from 10 different
Yeah.
agencies.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, maybe I'm just jaded because I know people are trying to, like, you know, they're trying to develop a sustainable energy system. Like, can I just put a buoy in the water and it's like 6 months to get all the permits
Yeah.
to like
Yeah.
drop something on a boat?
Yeah.
I'm like, maybe it's not too far. I don't know. I'm a modelist, I don't have to deal with much of this stuff. And like practices. But do we really want, I mean, I think there's a broader discussion to have about it.
Well, and we did keep coming back to the fact that we were all at the table. We were trying to achieve the same thing. It's not perfect, but do we really need perfect? Do we just need protective? And that's kind of how we pushed forward. And we developed trust. And that was a huge thing too, is we were all sitting around the same table trying to achieve the same thing. And the collaboration, the collaborative process and the relationships that we developed, there was so much trust building that at the end of the day, we all knew it wasn't perfect, but it really did achieve ecological gains in a meaningful way that we could all get behind. So it gave the port, it really gave the port the, just that assurance.
It gave us predictability.
Predictability.
Started, you know, on how we're going to approach our repair and maintenance activities for the next 10 years. So like, we know what to expect now for the next 10 years. We'll probably, you know, because this took 7 years to get through. We'll probably get started on this in a couple years.
For the next one.
The 3 years time you're starting it.
Yeah. But I mean, so it's yeah, but I think once you realize, or you build that trust, or, you know, realizing that you do all want the same thing, I think that goes a long way. And
Yeah.
instead of working at them or them working at us, being able to work with each other made a big difference.
And then the next steps are that it's going to be revisited every year. So there are opportunities to make necessary updates as new information becomes available, tweak things that maybe we got a formula wrong, or, you know, like we did the best that we could. So annual updates. And then this really was also set up so that the framework could be modified slightly to include other ports that are going to have the same struggle. They just weren't on the same timeline, and frankly didn't have the same funding mechanisms to actually pay for this maybe outright to build their own. So we all knew going in that this was going to try to be used for other ports as well. So that's actually what's up next, is we're working with those additional ports to make updates. So with that, I think that's our presentation. It was 5 minutes long.
So much.
Yeah.